Rebuilding old school jet surf engines. Hey guys, Rod here, Jetboard Australia. Welcome back to the channel. It's been a little while since we've done a service video, so we're back in the workshop. So we've got an old school jet surf. This one's a GP100. It's got the old style engine and engine cradle set up in it. So we're going to whip this puppy out. We're going to recondition it. It's got a couple of issues. We'll do a top end. It needs a crankshaft because of the starter gear assembly's worn. We'll rebuild that, show you all the tips and tricks you need to know if you want to do that yourself. If not, gives you an idea of what we do in our workshop here anyway. So we'll get stuck into this one and yeah, make it new again. Okay, we've got the engine out, so we'll start tearing it down. So let's start with the carburetor end. That's pretty basic. So the Carby has just some Allen key screws in there. Just some socket heads in there. Now one thing when you're looking at the carburetors, what you want to do is just check out that the butterfly shaft isn't too sloppy. The one's really good. There's no movement in that, which is great, and it all looks great. Again, with carburetors, I have done another video on carburetors. Again, I'll put the link in the description, and that runs through exactly how to do pop-off pressures and how to set the diaphragms and stuff. So again, that's another video. So we've got that out of the way. Here, we'll replace this gasket, and you'll notice this little hole here. That hole feeds into this tube. The tube runs around into the crankcases, and that creates the pulse for the fuel pump in there. And if anyone knows anything about these early two-stroke fuel pumps, go-kart style carburetors or jet ski style carburetors, you'll see that the diaphragm inside here, which operates the fuel pump, so you can see the hole here, it runs into this bottom diaphragm. Actually, sorry, it's the second diaphragm. It runs into the second diaphragm, and it oscillates again exactly as that pump we had in the hull as a bilge pump, with the two check valves, and it pumps back and forward. And so that's how that system works. So if you see any damage to that hole, that hose I should say, replace that, because that runs the fuel pump. So that gives you an idea of that end. And what we'll do, we might pop all the starter gear assembly off. Pretty straightforward. So we'll get the idler gear off first. We just put a screwdriver or an Allen key or something there just to stop it turning. Off, and that little gear is on a little hex drive there. We'll give that a little bit of a tweak under there. Get that off. Starting to come there. See, it's got a little hex in there that drives it, and that drives onto that gear. I'm going to check those bearings out. That's another thing we'll look at in a sec. We'll get this housing off here. I have a special tool for that, but you know, you can use a big shifter or a pair of multi-grips or whatever you like, but that holds that. And again, we'll just put something in between the gears, and that nylon cap should simply unscrew. And this is one of the problems with this motor. I have done the starter clutch in this before, and I said to the customer, if it starts slipping again, we're going to have to replace the crank. So unfortunately, we've got to that stage where the crank has to be redone. This Allen key here. Again, stick something in the cases there. Start rotating. There's not a lot of force on this generally, so you shouldn't do any damage. Let's come undone. Okay. Again, these would be Loctited, because obviously they spin pretty quickly. So we'll reassemble that with Loctite. Yeah, you can see the blue Loctite on it when I've done it last time. And so this little gear assembly just slides off. And again, I've done a video on these clutches and how they work, different models. There's about 3 different styles of clutches. Again, I'll put a link in the description on how that all works up there. But the crankshaft, unfortunately, it's difficult to see, but it's worn here. You can feel the lumps and bumps with your finger. That clutch isn't grabbing on that anymore, and unfortunately not driving. So we're replacing the crankshaft for that reason. The crankshaft is in good condition otherwise. In fact, these crankshafts, I'm assuming, are designed for a go-kart originally, and to rev to about 12,000 RPMs. In this application, they rev to about 8, 9 at the most with the rev limiter. So they're not working very hard, and they're quite large for the capacity of the engine and what they're doing. So cranks are great in these. The only way you destroy them is if they wear out on the clutch here, as you see, and you fill them full of salt water and let them sit. So that's that. The other thing, while we've got all that apart, just check the bearings in there. They seem great. There will be always a little bit of infloat in that. That's no drama, but the bearings feel good, and I believe I may have replaced them at some other stage. So, okay, let's get this cylinder head off. So again, Allen key's in the top, and I've got the wrong key. That's it there. These can be a bit tight. They are subjected to the salt water in the water jacket. That one I loosened earlier. And they are coming undone, which is good. Yep, they've all cracked loose, which is great. So while we're here too, we'll look at this. These two socket heads here are generally there to hold a spring that holds the spark plug cap on. It's missing, so we'll put another one on there. So it's just a simple spring. You'll see that in go-kart stuff. Again, because these go-kart people, they have these little springs. The new ones have a NGK retainer on it, so they don't do that system anymore, which is a lot more easier, but these are a smaller plug. You'll notice the plugs in this model compared to the newer ones are a smaller plug with a smaller plug cap, so you can't interchange. So anyway, let's get this puppy off and see what's in there. Okay, we've got the last of those bolts out, so we'll grab the soft hammer, give it a whack, and boom, there she goes. They have a little lip, you can see here, that sits down inside the cylinder, so they sit in really nicely. But let's have a look over here. O-rings are all intact, a little bit of corrosion, not too bad. A few O-rings missing, but they'll be sitting in the head as they are here. Yeah, it looks all good, and then we'll run the piston up. It's relatively clean, so yeah, not so bad. All right, so that's the head off. I'll get that out of the way, and then we'll slip the cylinder off. Now, little tricks for cylinders. These cylinder head bolts are very tight to the cylinder itself, so I've got a 10mm spanner where I've ground the outside of the ring spanner down so I can get in. As you can see, it's tight in there. So with that ring spanner, that allows me to get in. Even with that, it's a bit of a tight squeeze, as you can see. But if you don't do that, you can undo them with the open end, and especially in places like this where you can't actually get the ring spanner in. So this one will have to be undone by the open end. And this one, just spin them off. And while we've got the engine over this side, we'll have a look at the engine mounts. So these are the engine mounts. Often what they'll do is they'll delaminate from the cylinder in the back and they'll peel off. So give them a good shove. They're in good condition. If they're not, they'll start to half peel off. Again, need to replace them. They just screw into the cylinder themselves. And same on this side. This looks, oh, up there it goes. That one's on its way. See, that one's peeling. That one's no good. And you compare that to that one. That one's fine. So that engine mount will need replacing. And that's the engine mount which generally cops it the most. It's on the exhaust side, most vibration, and it cops the heat. So, and that's the one with the screw still in it. Obviously for the slot you saw in the engine mount bracket there. So that's something to check while we're here. Obviously there's another one at the back here. And then there's a real rubbery one, which is a smaller one, which is near the clutch gears. They really last well, to be honest with you. They seem to be a better mount, but they're more flexible too. So looks like we'll have to put one engine mount on that. But it's not a big deal. They're not that expensive. So they'll go hard up against there. So what you're going to do is roll it over this side, whip these ones off. That cylinder's already on the move, which is good. One's off. sliding the cylinder forward as we go. Okay, so they're all off now, so we'll just gently slide the cylinder off. There we go. So one thing that can happen with these cylinders, if they haven't been off regularly, these holes can salt up and corrode and makes it difficult to get the cylinder off. So again, the old rubber hammer gives it a bit of a tickle up, that'll get them off. So anyway, let's have a quick look at the cylinder over here. Still got some hone marks in it. Well, it does have some scuffing marks in it there. But what we look for in the cylinder is damage from corrosion. The Nickel cylinder, because these are a Nickel cylinder, can get corrosion between the nickel and the aluminium and bubble. I've seen quite a few of them. Then the nickel flakes off, and of course the flaking of nickel just tears the piston ring to pieces. So that looks fine. So we'll give that a hone up and a clean up before it goes back on. So that's all cool. And then piston looks all right. A little bit of wear from the Teflon coating, but not too bad. And then we'll whip this ring off. And what we do with the ring, we set them down into the cylinder like that, and I'll check the clearance there, but we are going to replace it anyway. But just to get an idea how worn it is, we can check that out later. So that's it there. Alrighty, so let's get this piston off. And this can be a whole lot of fun in itself, I can tell you. So the wrist pin or gudgeon pin clip has a little tag on it. So grab it with the long nose pliers and we'll give it a bit of a roll and a twist. And out she comes. And you often bend them coming out, but again, you never use those again. We replace those. So that one's out. And then hopefully, so we're just going to knock that wrist pin out now. So I'll just grab a little screwdriver and my soft hammer, and we don't hit it too hard, so we don't bend the rod on it. We gently try and tap that out. There she goes. It's on its way. That's probably enough. Boom, out she comes. So you have a little end bearing, and then you have two spaces. One staying there. Two spaces either side of the gudgeon pin. So yeah, that's all pretty good, but again we'll replace all that. So once we get to this stage, what we look for is damage in the little end bearing. So in most cases you get corrosion or chipping in the little end bearing. Now the bearing itself tells me things are good, and if we look at the rod, there's no chipping, it's very smooth inside, no signs of corrosion. That one's happy days. So it's a shame we've got to change this crank just for the clutch, but anyway, that's the way it goes, unfortunately. And of course then you have your gasket. One thing I like to look for too, because the crankcases on these are actually split, I guess, horizontal with the, or longitudinally to the crank. Make sure that they are sealing nicely there. There's a little O-ring cord that goes in that, but we'll look at that later. So, all right, we'll get this starter motor out of the way. Do that, and then same again on this side. And that's got the earth wire on it. Comes off, and then of course the starter motor comes off. Out of the way. Alright, so to split the cases, we need to take this reed block off. So we'll whip that off. Alright, that comes off there. And then we'll remove the pulse tube. Snip off the cable tie. Off she comes. So the reed is just a big aluminium block with some leads into the reed. So here we go. Here's the reed valve. So they run a carbon fibre reed, which is all the latest and greatest, good technology. And what we have a look at is make sure this plate's not all rusty and the bolts are all knocked around, and that the reeds themselves are actually sitting down nicely. So that's in lovely condition, that reed. So again, we'll reuse that again. Excellent. And get rid of the gasket, because that's got to split through there. So that's out of the way. We'll get rid of this timing sensor as well. They're a little bit fiddly, so we'll get that out of the way. Okay, it's out of the way. So the way that works is if you hall sensors or proximity switches type thing, there's a magnet here, and the little sensor sits at the top. Every time the magnet here passes past the sensor, it tells the ICU to fire the ignition. Very, very simple. All right, cool. So next thing to do is we need to crack these cases. To crack the cases and get the crank out, we need to take this coupling off. Now that's a bit of a thing. So I have a special tool for that. Holds the coupling. Now if you don't have a special tool, suggestion is just a big ass square screwdriver. That's all you need in there, but that's safer. And then we'll get the correct size Allen key. We'll put that against the bench like that, because this will be tight. And then she comes undone. Yep. Again, this will have Loctite on it, so it will be tight. That's out like that. Okay, so this is where we're going to bring the serious gear out. This is a hydraulic puller I have, and I have a special mandrel. I have a small lathe at the back. I machined that up. So basically it sits in the center of the crank, neat on the thread, with a step on it that sits on the end of the crankshaft end, and clear of the coupling, and then we put the puller on it from there. Okay, so I've got that set behind the coupling on the little shaft and on there. So basically all we do now is we crank it in. Now you can use a standard puller for this. The hydraulic pullers create a lot more force and make it easier to get off, because they can be damn tight, these. So in a sec, this thing is going to go pop. Sometimes they go pop really good. There's a lot of load on that. A lot of load on that. That's a tight one. Very, very, very tight. Oh yeah, there she goes. And you can see how tight they are. So basically what there are, they're on a taper. Oops, that's around the other way. So there's, you can see, on a taper with a Woodruff key. Okay, let's get these crankcases apart. So I just use a little socket there with an Allen key drive. All right, all the bolts are out. We missed the soft hammer again. Well, it's falling apart without it anyway. Look at that, beautiful. So I'll slowly pop that off. Yeah, it looks nice inside, no corrosion. No corrosion on the crank. It's a shame we've got to change that, but anyway, that's life. Just tap that through. Go on. Okay, there it is apart. So as I said, there's these little O-ring cords that seal the cases. They go no gasket goo or any of that sort of stuff. So we'll keep them aside, and then. Yeah, the main bearings are lovely in this. It's although a little bit rumbly there. The seals are quite worn. If you look in there, you can see the seal is very worn. So that definitely needs replacing. And the seal on the other side, it's a strange setup, but it actually seals on the starter gear assembly. So I'll grab that and show you. So your starter gear assembly actually seals in that seal there. So the seal that seals the crankcases is actually in the starter bearing, so that can get worn. So what happens is when the engine cranks, that cranks over. Then when the engine fires, the starter motor stops. That stops. That seal doesn't rotate, but the seal in the center which is that fella there, rotates. So that's your crank seal there. And of course then you have the cap on the end. So that side's got really good sealing. So if you're looking at that seal thing, and that's very large for crankcase seal, it's not so much because it doesn't rotate all the time. So that's how that works. So there we go. So what I'll do, I'll get this all cleaned up. We'll get the bits and pieces we need and we'll start putting it together. All good. One quick job we'll do before we send it off and get it cleaned. We'll actually pull these seals out, and this is a seal removing tool. There she comes. A bit of corrosion around it. So, yep, that definitely needs replacing. A little fella here. Same again. You can see the wear in there. Yep, definitely worth doing for those two. So that's it. Okay, now we've cleaned up all the parts. As you can see, I've cleaned up the top of that cylinder. It's got all the corrosion, cleaned out the O-ring grooves. I've given the cylinder a light hone. I don't know if you can see it there, but I've run a hone through that and just done a hand hone on that. The cross-hatching and the hone is very important to any engine. The cross-hatching and the scratching and the cross-hatching actually hold oil on the cylinder. So what that does is if the oil is held on the cylinder, it helps lubricate the piston, the ring, and also helps sealing of the ring when the engine is running. So that's very important. So these are obviously a nickel cylinder. They're very hard, but you can lightly hone them and scratch them up. So that's been done. And then also we've cleaned up the crankcases and we've knocked the main bearings out. Now what we noticed when we knocked the main bearings out, we do have a problem. This is an earlier model crankcase. The earlier model Jetsurf bearings had a small step in it. So what they used to do is have that in the case so that the step would sit past the circlip. That's not necessary. And unfortunately you can't buy these bearings anymore. I can't buy them from Jetsurf, I can't buy them from a local bearing supplier, and we'd rather have the later model bigger, wider bearings in there anyway. So what the story is this bearing is actually in the outer race 2mm wider than this little fella. As you can see, there's a little step there. This one's completely flush. So now if we install that bearing into the crankcases, put the crank in there and try to close it, we'd have a 2mm gap and we would shut the cases. So that's obviously not going to work. So what we do is we've got to move this circlip, and luckily enough I'm a machinist. I've got a lovely little Colchester lathe at the back there that I can set this up in. I've got a little mandrel I've made to hold this so it runs true. So what we do is we remove that circlip. I've got a little handmade tool I put in there. I actually machine that circlip 2mm wider, which will allow that new bearing to sit back 2mm more, so allow the crankcases to close and give the correct clearance on the main bearings on the crank. Luckily enough, there's enough material in the back here so we can still have a seal without that protruding or rubbing on anything silly. So all we've got to do now is run up to the lathe, set that up, machine that groove, and that way we can run the new bearings. And you know, if you don't do that process, well, we've got to run the old bearing, and it seems silly to put an old bearing back into a brand new engine. But if you don't, you've got to replace the crankcases, and it's a major. So it's a simple job for me to redo that groove, and that'll keep this little engine running. So anyway, we'll zip up the back and get it set up in the Colchester and machine that out. Okay, here we are down at the Colchester lathe. I've got my little packing shim here. The idea behind that is that's a perfectly flat parallel disc, and it pushes up against the true faces of my chuck. So that sits on there. And we get the crankcases. We put them against that. So what that does, that gives us a perfectly flat surface, so that crankcase is true to the center line of the lathe. And then of course, once we do the chuck up, tighten that up, and the 3-jaw chuck will centralise it enough to do that circular groove. So just give that a little nip up there. So we'll bring the tool in, set it up. What I'm going to do, I'm going to set my compound slide to 0 there. I'm going to bring the tool in. We can't see it from there, but I'll take another view. We'll zero my scale up here. Alright, now that scale's zeroed, I can bring that slide back out of the way and remove that circlip. That's out of the way. So now when I bring this back in, scale back to, so bring that into 0. Boom, 0. That's exactly where we need it. Perfect. So that's lined up with the edge of the groove on that front edge of the tool. So I know that the circlip groove is 1.5 mil. So if I go 1.5, that should get me aligned with the edge of the outside of the circlip groove, and I need to go another 2 mil. Go from 0. That's 1 and 2. So that's spot on where we need it to reset that groove. Spin it by hand, make sure it doesn't bump on anything. It's good. Get it in there. There we go. Yep, that's the right depth. We're good to go. Now, and there you can see the groove in there. Good job. Okie dokie. Well, we've got these crankcases sorted out now. As you can see in here, we've redone the groove. You can see there we've widened that circlip groove, and that'll allow that bearing to sit in nice, and the circlip can just push to one side. No harm done. All good. So we'll start putting that together. Get that circlip in there. There. Make sure we push it right down to the far side there. So that's cool. Okay, got the cases there on a block of wood. We're going to warm that up with my little propane torch, and then we can put the bearing in. So let's make some smoke and fire. Fire anyway. I'll try and get the smoke down while it's not burning the block of wood. Nice and easy. So there's our smoke. We're going to set the wood on fire. Should be good and warm there now. Give it a little dust display there. And the bearing as well. The cage that way. Just get it started. Put that in. Boom. Easy as that. So that's the best way to do it without damaging the bearing. And we'll do the same to the other one, and then we'll start assembling it. Okay, time for the seals. Obviously, big seal on the big hole, little seal on the little hole. The rule of thumb with seals are, whichever the pressure size is, you want to put the spring. So in this case, the crankcase pressure is coming on the inside, so you put the seal in like that. And same with this one here, the spring always in the inside. And that way, what it does is when the pressure comes behind the seal, it actually pushes against the shaft, or the crankshaft in this case, and seals it up. So that's the rule of thumb with seals. So what we'll do, we'll bang a little bit of grease on it. The edge there. And then that's the circlip that we had machined, and as you can see the bearing sits nice in it. And we've just got enough room just to slide that seal in there behind there. Get that little tap into place. That's in. Do the same again with this one. Okay, let's get the second seal in. Again, a bit of grease. Again, with the spring downwards. That's how they get started. Drift in place. Still turn. Yep, beautiful. And what we'll do as well, inside that lip of that seal there, grease. Same with this one. This is the seal where the starter clutch assembly goes in. Alright, good stuff. Time for crankshaft. Alright, now let's put the little O-ring cords in here. So again, what we'll do, we'll run a bit of grease in the groove, and that holds it in place. And that also helps it seal a little bit. It goes together. I'm reusing the old ones, I find they're okay, but if you're anywhere near the bearing guy, you can buy yourself some O-ring cord and renew them, but I find they go fine the second time around. Now we'll just drop this crankshaft in, so obviously you've got to make sure it goes in the right way. So the tapered end is the drive end at the rear, which is that end. So we'll drop that in there, making sure the rod sticks through the right spot. That sits in there. And of course, this fella sits on top. Boom. Look at that, they go together, and you'll find once we tighten that up, I'll have a little bit of end float in there, but that's lovely. So let's get some bolts. We'll do that probably up, but obviously my machining on that circlip worked perfectly, so that's great. Okay, well let's put these bolts in. I like to put a little bit of grease on them when I put them together. It's something from my marine mechanic days. It stops the corrosion getting into the threads. You don't need a lot. Great, and look at that, crankshaft still goes around, it's perfect. Good, it's in the right way. So, alright, let's start on the top end. Okay, so we're going to put a brand new piston kit in it. So these are the ones we get from Jetsurf, or of course you can buy them for myself. I have them on my online store. So what we get in the kit is a brand spanking new shiny piston with Teflon coating. We get a piston ring, two little thrust washers, a little end bearing gudgeon pin, and two clips. So you get the whole shebang. So obviously with a brand new crankshaft, you want to put all new stuff there as well. So the way we do this is basically before you fit anything as far as the piston ring goes, let's check it with a cylinder. Now these being Nicholson bores, we don't have a choice of pistons, rings, oversizes, any of that. It's one piston fits all. So I like to do just a quick check just to make sure it feels fine. Yep, that's cool. If you're very fussy, you can put a feeler gauge in and check the clearance. You should have about 1 thou per inch of diameter of piston, roughly. And then of course, we'll just quickly check the piston ring. The best way to check the piston ring is get the piston itself, push it into the cylinder, and that squares the piston ring up. And we have a look at the light there, and that's got yeah, well, less than 1/2 mil. So as long as we've got clearance, that's the important thing. On another type of engine where you have different oversizes and different choices of rings, this would be more critical, but one piston ring fits all, so pretty simple. So we'll get that together, making sure that's right now. So first thing first, I like to lubricate up the little end. Get him in there. And then we'll put the piston pin. Piston. Yep, that's nice and smooth. And what we'll do first is we'll put one pin clip in one side. We'll put it on the rod, it's just easier that way. Now, I hate to say it, but these are a really tough clip, and they're a real pain in the butt to put in sometimes. So the trick is get the end in there, and if I swear here, don't stress, because there are a bugger to put in. So put that in the bottom of the groove and we'll roll that into place. It's partially in, so this is a trap, so if you don't get that piston clip into the groove, it'll come out. And of course, if the piston clip comes out, that's catastrophic. That makes a real mess. And the rule of thumb with two strokes is always have the piston pin gap at the bottom. It's a I don't know, bit of a wise tale, but the idea is this: as the engine fires, the momentum of the piston going down will throw the clip into the groove. That's the idea behind it. I've seen them go anywhere and seem to work just fine, but that's a little tip. So now obviously we need the piston to go the right way too, of course. So looking at the crankcases, you'll see the boost port. You'll see here the boost port gap in the piston. So obviously the boost port gap needs to go like that. So as you can see, the boost port there, the gap there. So you'll see there's an arrow on the piston, but the arrow on the piston is designed for an engine where the exhaust port is normally parallel with the crankshaft, which comes out the side. See the arrow? Arrow is normally where you point to the exhaust port, but this engine's been orientated sideways to sit in the board, so the arrow doesn't actually work in this particular case. So we look for the window for the piston port. So we get that in there. We put one of the thrust washers inside. Put that out of the way. Piston in there. Yep, this does not happen. If that falls out and you miss it and it rattles around the engine, ba-boomba, that gets nasty, so just make sure that does not happen. There. Just the pins in there. What we'll do, I've got my little tool here. Push the bearing back. The pin back a little bit. This tool to help me place there. That allows it to sit there. I juggle that. There she goes. Boom. That's in. So we push that hard against the piston pin clip on that side, which allows us to put this one in. Again, same scenario. Clip it in on those pliers. Get the bottom side in. Push it in place. After this, you set it down. So, making sure that's in the groove, which it is. And the clip is at the bottom. So that's perfect. So that won't come out. That coming out's always bad. Alright, beautiful. So we'll get that there. Now, I'll get the gaskets. The gasket sets again come in a kit from Jetsurf. Now, you'll get two base gaskets in the kit. And you'll see the difference here. One has the piston port, boost port gap in it, and one doesn't. So that's for the real early model engines. This is for the later model engines, which has that piston port gap. The early motors didn't have it. So that's the easiest way to work out what's what. Just set that gasket in place. We always put the gasket on before we put the ring on. The simple reason that it doesn't get caught up in the ring when you put it on. And as you can see, that matches up the boost ports, and of course it's a little oversized on the little transfer port, but that's fine. So all good. Next is the ring. Now the ring has a little number on it. Very difficult to see, but you'll see there's a little mark there. That always goes to the bottom. So we put that on, put that to the bottom, and we just basically roll it on. Like that. Just make sure it's free in the groove. If it sticks in the groove, you've got problems. And then of course with any two-stroke, you need a ring pin. See the little ring pin there, a tiny little pin. The pin's designed to stop the ring rotating, because if the ring rotates, it's going to get caught in the ports. And that particular pin's in a position on the cylinder where there's no ports, so the ring doesn't get bound up or anything. So I use Lanox to lubricate this, and there's one of the reasons why I do. A lot of people put oil on these when they assemble them. The starter system on these, especially these older boards, isn't terribly strong. So if you have too much oil in them, I find when you start them up fresh and new, they're very difficult to start. So with just a light coating of Lanox, it's enough to lubricate it for startup without making too much compression. So, alrighty, let's throw this cylinder on. So we'll give it a quick spray with some Lanox just to keep the cylinder lightly coated. So when it starts, it's got some lubricant. Now what we've got to be careful of here is the ring pin. So we'll sit that on the side like that, and you've got to have the ring aligned with the ring pin. So what I'm going to do is set the cylinder up. It just sits up right a little bit to make life a little easier. And we'll get the ring pin in the ring pin groove, and then we pinch down the ring so it sits in the groove. Now get your fingers so they're adjacent to the transfer ports there. So then when we put the cylinder on, obviously the cylinder goes to the coupling side, the exhaust side, so that the transfer port lines up. And then see these gaps here are for your fingers. So you line that up like that. And it's got a nice taper on the end there, it helps you put it on. So gently give it a wriggle, and boom, on she goes. Slide her over the studs. Making sure I don't pinch the gasket. So that's it. Cylinders on there. Cool. Alright, so a couple of our little 10mm nuts now to get these on. Some of them we've got to actually lift the cylinder back up a little bit to get them on. These two on this side are not so bad. Started. Now these two, so you've got to lift them up a little bit to get them in. So I might have that one down a little bit too far. So there you go. You need to lift them up so you get them in around the engine mounts. Take my special tool. This is my 10mm spanner, which I've ground very thin. You can see it's really thin, so I've ground the back of it out, so it makes it easier to get in to around the cylinder. So let's use the open end to get started. And again, there's no official torque on this, just do 1/3. It's not a diesel engine, it's going to be, it's not going to produce a 500 horsepower. But all we need to do is just keep that cylinder from coming off. Beautiful. Alrighty. And we can spin that over. And up she comes. Nice. Very nice. Alright, let's prepare the O-rings now for the cylinder head here. So basically we're going to use our grease again. Grease in these O-ring grooves. Corrosion as well. So you've got 6 little O-rings that go around. Now some models will have a copper ring, and some will have O-rings. This particular model has O-rings, so we'll replace it with O-rings. Grease those grooves, and the grease obviously holds it in place. So when we're assembling the cylinder head, nothing moves. Grease off the piston. Cool. So big O-ring around the outside. Pretty simple. Smaller O-ring sits in there. And we have 6 of these little babies. See how much grease there is. To seal the threads on the cylinder head so that water doesn't come out through the cylinder head bolts, which would be a bit not the go. And boom. Beautiful, ready for a cylinder head. Okay, we'll grab the cylinder head, and as you see, the piston doesn't come to top dead center. The cylinder head actually protrudes down inside the cylinder, so that helps seal it and locate the cylinder head when you put it on. But little problem we're going to fix before we put that on. The retainer spring for the spark plug cap is missing on this one, so I've got a new one there. We'll whip these off, and we'll stick a new one on before we put it on. Okay, just tighten them up. They don't actually tighten down on the spring, they bottom out inside the cylinder head. Okay, so now just a rule of thumb, that spring always goes on the exhaust side, so that when the spark plug cap comes through, it can lock into place. So on the exhaust side like that. Cylinder head's on there. Again, grab some of the little bolts and a bit of grease. Find them on. Okay, all torqued down. So that's got the top end on as well. Good stuff. Okay, we flipped him over. We'll do the reed valve now. When you do the reed valve, there's actually two different type reed valve gaskets. The thin one goes on the reed that side, and the thicker one that side. So you put the reed on first. So just slip that reed gasket over, and it doesn't matter which way the reed goes. It can go either direction, that way, that way. So just slot that puppy in, and then put that gasket on there. Pre-greased bolt ready to go. Now keep in mind that's got to go that side so that the pulse tube will fit onto there. So it slides in. That. Again, just a bit firm. Alright, what we'll do now, we'll put this drive coupling on this side. So you'll notice you've got this Woodruff key gap. We'll need that from the old crank, so I've got the old crank here. The trick with that, just an old screwdriver or a chisel, whatever you got. Just knock that puppy out. Clean up. Pop that in, and notice when you put it in, it's got a flat side. Flat side goes to the seal side. If you get it the other way around, what will happen is that'll chew the seal out. So that's just like that. Okay, we've got the coupling. We've cleaned up the taper on that, and you will remember when it came off, went off with a bang. I don't tend to put any grease or anything on that. I put it on dry because you want it to hold. In fact, a lot of people think the keys are what actually drives it, but it's actually the taper. The keys to locate it, but the taper actually does the driving. So you want to have that relatively dry, no grease on it, and then make sure the Woodruff key doesn't kick as you push it on. You give it a very light tap in. That's it. Okay, get the bolt, get our standard blue Loctite on it. This coming off is never ever good, so we'll Loctite it on. There's no washer or anything on that, just put that in there. No way to do it, just adds to the effect. Now we have the special tool which sits in the coupling. Now if you don't have the special tool, just a big flat bar or a big flat screwdriver or something will do the job there. But I've lucky enough got the right tool. Again, just nice and tight. Lovely. That's got him on. Cool. Alright, so we'll swing around to this side. Okay, we'll put this the starter gear assembly on, but while we're at it, we'll slip on the pulse tube from the manifold, bang a cable tie on that. It's a lot easier to do it now than inside the board. That off. Okay, so here's our starter clutch. As we all know, that's got a one-way bearing in it. It freewheels one way while the engine's running, and then when the starter motor drives it, it grabs the crankshaft. Some people call them a sprag clutch. This is more like a one-way bearing. So they come greased. I like to put a little extra in it, so this is the grease that Jetsurf recommend. I keep it in stock. It's Kluger special grease. They say with this type of grease, you don't want too good a grease because the clutch has got to grab. You don't want too much slip, so it's a base grease with not too many additives in it. So we'll throw a little bit more in here just to be sure. Again, you don't want to over grease it either. But when they're new, they're not too bad actually. That looks pretty good for grease, to be honest with you. A little bit more in there just to be sure. Alright, so that seal surface there seals on the seal, so basically we just give that a wriggle and she goes. And as you can see, it's turning the crankshaft that way and freewheeling that way. Really easy. And then we'll get the bolt. We don't want this coming off, so we're going to run our blue Loctite again. crankshaft. We'll use our special tool. Slide that on there. Do this up nice and tight. Beautiful. And we'll check out how that works. So obviously freewheeling that way, and that's basically freewheeling when the engine's running. And of course when the engine stops and the engine wants to start, the starter motor winds that gear this way, starts the engine will fire up and continue to run, and that'll freewheel. So it works pretty simple. So that's cool. Alright, once that's set, we'll put the idler gear on. So we'll go. It's got a little square on there. In fact, that's the way it's set last time, you can see. Alright, we'll pop him on. Okay, we'll just put the retainer on it. Again, a little bit of Loctite. So there you go, that's all cool. We'll put the little end cap on there, a tiny bit of grease on there. And this grease here, I'm just using a multi-purpose grease, but the grease, as I said, in the coupling is a special grease, or in the clutch I should say, is a special grease. And that cap's only held on with an O-ring. It doesn't have to be super tight, so hand tight's more than enough. Alright, cool, that's all good to go there. I think the next step, we'll put the timing sensor on. Obviously the timing sensor is triggered by the magnet in there, just so you know what's going on. So that little sensor sits in there, this little carbon fibre plate. Okay, I've just quickly thrown that starter motor on there. It's still loose, obviously there's the 2 bolts and then 2 at the back. But an important thing to remember here is this starter motor isn't dowelled in place, so see how it's floating around? It's really important to get the backlash between these gears right. So what I like to do is push that starter motor down, just check the gears have got a tiny bit of backlash in it, and then I like to hold it in place there and then do the bolts up. I have had it happen in the past where there's too much clearance in these gears, and you just feel a tiny little knock there. That's perfect. And what will happen is it'll actually strip that gear because it's not meshing properly. So very important to make sure that that's tightened up when they're meshed in place. Been caught there a few times myself, unfortunately. Tighten these 2 ones up the back. Okay, they're a bit tight for my little key there, so I'm just going to normal on key. Just snug that up. Okay, so that's the basic engine put together. What we're going to do now, just quickly, is a quick look at the carburetor. Now, I have done a video on a complete carburetor overhaul and the whole ins and outs of the carburetor. I'll put a description in my link on that one, so that's a whole thing all together. You know, you can spend an hour and a half on that. But what I'm going to quickly do, and I know this carburetor's right, is we just double check it. What we do is we check the pop-off pressure. So these are vacuum style carburetors, so they work on a vacuum in there and a diaphragm. So the vacuum gets pulled through the center of the carburetor into the diaphragm. The diaphragm pushes on the needle and seat, opens it, allows the fuel through. But the needle and seat needs to be sealing correctly, so when it's sitting it doesn't dribble or leak, and the spring pressure on the needle needs to be correct as well. So the best way to test that is with a little pop-off tester. So basically what we do, we hook this up to the carburetor like that, and then we get a little gauge here, and if you can see the gauge, the first one's 10 there. So what I do is I pump it up to 10 to start with, and see that's holding, which is fabulous. That's what it needs to do. Now this should pop off at about 12 to 14. Sometimes it pops off higher. It's going a little higher there, and it blew off there, but it came back to 14 once it popped off. So anywhere between 12 and 14, as it's settling there now, it's right on the money and it's holding and sealing. So that carburetor is perfect. That's exactly what you want. So that's good. So what we'll do then, get that sorted out, we'll put it on the engine. So in the kit, again, 2 gaskets. Make sure you get the right one. The one we need is the one with the square edge. The reason for that is you can see that the hole for the pulse sits up in there. There's 2 tiny little dowels, and I'll turn that up to the camera so you can see it better. There's 2 tiny little dowels here and here, 2 holes in the gasket, and then that sits in place there and there. And as you can see, the pulse hose is exposed. This particular gasket is nowhere close. So that's for another model. So pop that on, and obviously with 2 9-key screws down in there. And then of course we put the carburetor so that the diaphragm chamber is upwards. Screw that on. Boom, that's done. And there we go, completely reassembled, reconditioned engine. So that's really, really good. So a lot of people ask me questions, again, as I said before, about engine hours. If you're really fussy, you rebuild it every 50 hours, you can run them to 100. They talk about doing the clutch every 50 hours. So what I recommend with normal users, we do a rig on the clutch every 12 months. Every, say, 2 years, we'll do a top end overhaul. And the crankshaft, well, I've never seen a crankshaft wear out. I have seen obviously the starter bearing area be damaged, and I don't know if we showed that earlier in the video, but here we are, and this is why we replaced this crank. See, it's badly damaged there and grooved, and that's why we almost replaced. But the rest of the crank is in beautiful condition, which is a bit of a shame. But what do you do? But I've never seen one of those wear out. I'm imagining these cranks were designed for go-karts that rev up to about 12,000 plus RPM. These inside the boards are running at about 8,000 RPM. They're rev limited to 9 when they come out of the water. So they're quite a sturdy crank for the size engine. So they don't wear out. And because they have no solid load on them, they're basically driving a water pump. So they're not getting the knocking and the harsh treatment that you would get, say, in a go-kart or something that's attached to the road with mechanical gears and chains. This is simply driving a pump. So the engines aren't really working that hard. So they last really well, and providing they're all set up correctly, they're quite reliable. So anyway, let's get this thing on the board, and as we say, let's make some smoke and noise. Okay, so we've got us all back together. She's all running and happy days again now, so we'll get this back to the customer. But thanks for watching again, and listen, please subscribe to my site. Motivates me to do more and more of these videos. I know a lot of people who have been watching them and enjoying them and getting a lot of value out of them. So anyway, if you can subscribe, help me out with that one, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again.